Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to be explaining chapter 4 of the Brain Facts book. So the first thing I'm going to be explaining is declarative memory. Okay, so what is declarative memory? Declarative memory is the type of memory that encodes facts, events, places, so on and so forth. So basically, memories that are set in stone, right? So memories that can't, they can be interpreted, but if you've seen it firsthand, you know it's got to be true. Those type of memories. That's why I like to say you're declaring that it's true, right? So in this, there are two types of declarative memory. The first type being semantic memory, which encodes facts and even data, right? So, like, for example, semantic memory would be like the capital of US is DC, right? Or like 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. That's a fact. So that's semantic memory. Whereas episodic memory encodes events. So like let's say you were watching this video, right? That's an episodic memory because that's a memory for you. It's an event. Or more better put, like say you have an event where you have to go to a birthday party, right? Your birthday party. These are episodic memories, right? So in declarative memory, basically, before I talk about declarative memory, I think it's important to kind of take a look at the difference between long-term versus short-term memory, right? So long-term memory are memories that are stored for a long time, right? You can recall them no matter what. Whereas short-term memory is kind of like you learn, you forget. Like it's a very short span. You'll only remember it while you're using it, or you'll remember it for a few days and then forget about it. That type of memory, right? So basically, in declarative memory, there can be long and short-term memory, right? So I'll get more into this. First, let me focus on the agenda. Okay, so now let's talk about amygdala and the parahippocampal regions. So, okay, in our first chapter, I hope you guys remember that the hippocampus is the region responsible for encoding memories. Encoding memories. So the hippocampus is split into multiple parts, right? So there's your hippocampus itself, there's the parahippocampal regions, which are the regions surrounding the hippocampus. So let me draw a quick diagram, right? Your hippocampus looks somewhat like a seahorse, actually. I believe this is the most 3D representation of it. It has some bumps and it kind of has like a seahorse structure, if you can see, like that looks like a seahorse, right? So the area surrounding it is known as your parahippocampal region. And then you have your two almond-shaped structures known as your amygdala. They're not actually like that. Say this is your amygdala, right? Amygdala. So the amygdala is involved in emotional processing, right? Um, so let's talk about these structures. So basically, our memory is obviously heavily influenced by our emotions, right? So the way we perceive a memory is associated with our emotions. Something that's good for us may not be good for other people, right? So let's say you won a competition. That's a great memory for you. But what if the person next to you who was also in that competition lost to you? They dissociate it with negative emotions, right? So the way we perceive emotions, how we associate them is something that the amygdala is responsible for. Additionally, there's a type of memory where basically any situation that elicits an emotion, like say you're in a situation where you're sad, your emotional memory will cause you to react in a similar way in all those situations. So your amygdala is basically associated with emotional memory, and even we'll get more into this in later videos. But the amygdala is really important to your memory because it associates emotions with them. There's also the parahippocampal regions, which are the regions around the hippocampus, which are responsible for encoding the what in your memories. Like, okay, so say you have in episodic memory, right? This is only in episodic. Parahippocampal is useful for episodic memory. I spelled that wrong. Episodic, my bad. I spelled this right, guys. Episodic memory, right? So basically, you in a memory, right? You have three parts to it. You have the what, you have like the where, and you have, I guess, like the like why it's happening, the context, right? So your brain or your parahippocampal region is mostly associated with the what part of it, right? So it encodes what's going on in the memory. So like it would encode in this memory, I'm cutting into my cake wearing a blue shirt, and all of that stuff, right? So that's what the parahippocampal regions are for. The reason I'm specifying these are because these are common brain read questions. It's in the brain facts book. I highly suggest you read over it. I'm just giving you a brief overview because these aren't as hard as some of the other concepts that are going to come up later on in this topic. So moving on to the next part, we have something called working memory. So that's where the distinction between long-term and short-term memory comes into play. Oops. Working memory, right? Okay. So working memory is a type of declarative memory. So remember, there's always this hierarchy, right? I'm going to draw a diagram towards the end of the video, but it's really important to remember which are the types of declarative memory versus which ones are not, because these questions get you tripped up. They usually will come in the form of like, oh, true or false, declarative memory contains working memory, right? So let's get into what working memory is. So imagine this, you made a new friend at in one of your classes, and you want to get their number, but you forgot a piece of paper. So they'll tell you your phone number and you remember it only for the time that you use it. So tell me this, if you didn't write down the number, would you remember that 9-digit piece of information, I guess, even like 4 hours later? I mean, if you would, that's great for you, but I think you might be surpassing the normal person's ability to remember these things. And this phenomenon is what's known as working memory. Your brain, when you receive a piece of information, when your brain is using it, your brain will remember it. But once you stop using it, your brain will forget it. So a common example of this is remembering phone numbers, names even, names, and so on and so forth. So working memory is classified as only being used, remembering only while using. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Remembering only while you use it. Only while you use it. So as a fun fact, there's actually a rule in working memory called the 7 plus minus 2 rule, right? So basically what the rule says is that in working memory, you can only remember up to 7 minus 2 or plus 2 pieces of information. So that's why you're able to remember phone numbers, right? The average number is like 3 plus 3 plus 4, which is equal to 10, which is close enough to 9, right? Or like names, you remember names that are one word long, right? So that's why you're able to remember it. So yeah, the range to remembering it is like 5 to 9 words, you know? So that's a 7 plus 2 rules. That's the number of things you can remember in working memory. So it's a cool fact. It's in a different book, but it's just fun to know. Okay, so now let's move on to the last form of declarative memory called spatial memory. So in your brain, this place is associated with, I believe it's your parahippocampal regions as well. or some regions in your hippocampus, actually, not parahippocampal regions, in your hippocampus. And basically, there are two types of cells, your place cells and your grid cells. So imagine you're a rat trying to navigate through a maze, right? You don't, let's just assume that for time being, you have no idea of your surroundings. You've never been in this maze before, right? So, how does your brain navigate this? Well, what your brain does is it actually creates a temporary grid of your circumstance, right? So, it'll create like a map. And what it'll do is there are certain cells called your grid cells, which use landmarks and create temporary coordinates in your brain. Like say you're a rat, you're starting over here, right? That's you. And say that here right here where I'm drawing my purple line, there's a wall. But so what your brain will do is it'll store that in a temporary grid cell neuron, and it'll remember that as like relative to that landmark. It'll try and navigate your way out of the maze like that. So what it'll do is grid cells basically create a temporary map. Right? So they create a temporary map and they basically use your coordinates as a generalization, right? Whereas place cells are different. What your place cells do is they use existing landmarks that you know of. And these are usually activated in places that you know you're familiar with, right? So what these do is they basically are like, oh, I know where I am. I know that these landmarks are there. So using this, how will I navigate my way through? So place cells are basically they're like your map cells, whereas grid cells, I'd say, are more like your maze cells. So and the difference is that the map knows where everything is. You just need to find your way around it. But your grid cells, they act as kind of your maze cells because you don't know what's coming. You just use the information that you get on the way to try and navigate your way through. So yeah, this is my video on declarative memory. I hope this was able to answer you some of your questions. The next video is going to be on non-declarative memory. So yeah, I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at stemwme@gmail.com or leave a comment. Thank you.